So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon. We have a lot lined up for you today, so let's get started with a look at the day's highlights. Prices of Korea's Jeonse or lump sum deposit rentals have been shooting up. No thanks to low interest rates, a shortage in Jeonse supply, and growth in monthly rentals. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. With hopes of boosting domestic spending, Korea is set to roll out its own version of Black Friday, with retailers offering special discounts and deals nationwide. Now to the latest on that enormous corporate scandal engulfing Volkswagen. He hung around for a couple of days, but the company's CEO resigned on Wednesday, following revelations that Volkswagen had fitted millions of vehicles with software to cheat emissions tests. Our Son Jung-in has more.
An executive committee of Volkswagen's supervisory board called an emergency meeting on Wednesday to announce that its CEO had resigned amid the biggest scandal in the company's 78-year history.
Martin Winterkorn has offered to step down from his post as CEO. The supervisory board has accepted this decision with great respect for Winterkorn.
The committee stated that Winterkorn had no knowledge of the manipulation of emissions. Senior members of the board in a separate statement said an internal investigation would eventually identify the people responsible. In a busy day of developments, an opposition party in Germany claimed the German government was aware that Volkswagen was using test rigging software but let it go on. Germany's transport ministry has denied the Green Party's claims. After losing more than a third of its market value during the first 2 days of the trading week, Volkswagen shares finished up 5.19% on Wednesday. But as Volkswagen finds itself in an ever-expanding web of legal challenges around the world, in addition to a criminal probe in the US, there isn't much light at the end of the tunnel for the world's biggest automaker. Son Jung-in, Business Daily.
Meanwhile, Korea's air passenger traffic rose in August after a 2-month on-year dip, indicating signs of recovery from the aftershock of the MERS outbreak that slammed the brakes on the travel industry. According to the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, the nation's total air passenger count gained 2% last month compared to a year before to over 8.2 million passengers. The number of travelers on international flights fell 3.7% on year, declining for a third consecutive month, but slowing from a 15% drop in July. The latest figure is mainly due to a sharp decline in the number of passengers to and from China. Meanwhile, a large increase in domestic passengers bumped up the total count with a 16% rise, reaching a new monthly high of 2.7 million passengers. We're now learning about the economic impact that extra temporary holiday had ahead of this year's Liberation Day holiday. August 14th had belated been designated as a temporary holiday, 1 day ahead of Liberation Day that fell on a Saturday. In its own analysis, KB Kookmin Card said its customers spent 10% more this year and 17% more transactions compared to last year, when the Liberation holiday also spanned 3 days. It noted around a 20% rise in both the number of transactions and spending at rest stop restaurants along highways and at airports. KB Kookmin Card said the extra holiday helped spur consumption in August as a whole, with the month recording an on-year 7% jump in money spent. Tenants on lump sum deposit Jeonse housing deals are dreading the end of their 2-year leases here in Korea, as prices are soaring like there's no tomorrow. Is there any way to put a stop to the surge in prices? And how can the Korean government step in to solve this growing Jeonse problem? Let's find out.
Slow economic growth and record low interest rates are sending lump sum deposit Jeonse prices skyrocketing in the greater capital region. In fact, Jeonse rates for nearly 10% of apartment units in Seoul and nearby areas accounted for 90% of the actual property value last month. Up until now, Jeonse used to be a good way for landlords to get decent returns on large deposit at banks that used to offer higher rates. And for tenants, the system was considered a cheaper alternative to buying a home while not having to make monthly rental payments. But now, many tenants are dreading the end of their 2-year contracts because many property owners have either raised their Jeonse prices or have switched to monthly rental deals due to low interest rates. This has left tenants with no choice but to sign higher-priced leases or move out and look for other homes, leading to a vicious cycle of soaring prices and falling supply.
And to tell us more about this, we're now joined by Professor Kim Se-won of Ewha Women's University. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
All right, so like we just saw in the report, we're almost at a point where Jeonse leases are as high as the actual property prices. But for those of our viewers who are overseas, who might not be familiar with this whole Jeonse system, can you tell us a little bit about it and why the tenants are struggling so much with these soaring prices?
Okay, the Jeonse system is pretty unique system that only exists in Korea as a housing rental system. And there has been, for the past 2 years, there has been serious shortages of the Jeonse. Because of that, the Jeonse deposit has been skyrocketed. And that is a pretty much big burden to middle-income families because the average increase of the Jeonse deposit amounts to over 80 million won over 2 years. And that is many times higher than income increase of the middle class families. So that is, I think that is not something bearable burden to even middle-income families in Korea.
All right, well, you mentioned a little bit about the supply, but what's the main reason behind this such a shortage in the supply of Jeonse homes?
Well, I think there are two major reasons. One is from supply side and another is from demand side. For the supply side, the landlords of the Jeonse decide to switch to monthly rent because of the low interest rate. So the benefit of the Jeonse landlords comes from interest income of the Jeonse deposits.
Right.
And as of now, the interest rate is 1% level, a historical low level. So because of that, we have less supply of the Jeonse. And for the demand side, there has been many more new construction of the reconstruction of the apartments, in particularly in Gangnam area. So the people who are involved in the reconstruction of the apartment needs more Jeonse. So that's from demand side.
All right. Well, how are things looking for fall after the Chuseok holiday, though?
Well, I think the low interest rate will be continued for several years. So the shortages of Jeonse will be continued by the end of the year at least.
All right. Well, now at this point, we ask ourselves, wouldn't it be better to just buy a home then, since these Jeonse lease prices are soaring like there's no tomorrow, like we said before?
Well, I think for Jeonse tenants, there are two choices, rationally speaking. But one is buying houses, and second is switching to monthly rent. But for the case of the buying houses, there is a high possibility actually of the decreasing housing prices in the near future. And that might be caused from demographic changes of the Korean economy. We have more old people who sells the house and less younger people who buys the house. So it is pretty much expected that there is a possibility of the declining housing prices. And for the case of the demand side, we know that the Jeonse is pretty much that problem even continues over the long run.
All right. Well, but then this is going to continue the vicious cycle of the already massive household debt that Korea is struggling with as well, because more people are borrowing to buy homes, right?
Right, exactly. So we have actually a huge burden of the household debt. Household debt is estimated over 80% of the total GDP of the nation, and which is over 1,000 trillion Korean won. So it is already a big burden to Korean economy. So in addition to that, there is a high possibility for U.S. Fed will be hiking interest rate by the end of this year. In that case, naturally, Korean market interest rate will be increased.
Okay.
So for higher interest rate, with the more burden of the debt, there will be more possibility of the bankrupted households.
All right, but then you mentioned a little bit before, but how would this affect the Korean economy as a whole? Let's look at it in the bigger picture.
Well, the worst scenario might be the combination of the debt and the bankruptcies of the households and the bank together. And if that happens, because of the bubble burst in the housing market, the real fundamentals of the Korean economy will be shaken. And that is really connected to the longer recession of the Korean economy. But that is, again, the worst scenario.
Well, in order to not see that worst case scenario happen, the Korean government has obviously been doing things to solve this problem. For example, recently started the New State Housing Project to help secure more rental homes. So what are some other things that the Korean government is doing right now?
I think that is really appropriate policy for stabilizing Jeonse market. But the thing is, it is not enough yet.
Not enough.
Yeah, and in addition to that, the Jeonse problem is something unexpected obstacles of the government policy, because like 2 years ago, government started the policies for promoting domestic consumption. In the middle of that process, Korean government induced more people to buy more houses, which was partially successful. But they met something unexpected obstacles for promoting consumption, which is Jeonse crisis.
All right, well, do you think these measures or plans will work, in your opinion?
Well, I wish I know the correct answer, but the fact is there's no single-cut solution or policy for stabilizing Jeonse market. Housing market is really complicated. So when we recognize the shortages or problems of the housing market, to stabilize the market, housing market, it takes several years, because ultimate solution is related to constructing more apartment and houses, which takes several years.
All right. Okay, so I guess one thing that we could wait for is the U.S. Fed Reserve's rate hike, which might come sometime this year, right?
Right,
okay.
Exactly.
All right, thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Now, the Korean government wants the local tourism sector to get back on its feet after being hit hard by the MERS outbreak, still fresh in people's minds from a few months ago. So it's planning to institute a number of measures, including more financial support to revitalize the struggling sector. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korea's Culture Ministry is working towards the normalization of the local tourism industry, which was largely affected by the MERS outbreak earlier this year. The Culture Ministry said Wednesday that it'll inject an additional $109 million of supplementary budget on top of the $200 million it allotted as special loans in August. Those eligible to the loans can pay back the borrowed amount after a period of between 4 to 13 years with floating interest of under 2.3%. Conditions, the ministry says, are more favorable than those currently provided by local banks. The ministry added it'll improve the country's recognition of products considered to be the highest quality, especially traditional craftwork pieces, in order to further boost morale of the local cultural industry. The ministry unveiled a new certification mark to guarantee the authenticity and quality of items, with a consultative group to start working on the certificate's promotional strategies in December this year. The group comprised of officials from the Korea Creative Content Agency and Korea Craft and Design Foundation will be tasked with creating guidelines that will help select the products to bear the mark. Culture Minister Kim Jong-duk hopes the improved system will help maximize the country's potential in tourism and the export of culture-related goods and play a positive role in boosting the local economy. Data released by the Bank of Korea earlier this week shows sales of local businesses during the April to June period plunged more than 4% from the same period last year, largely due to the MERS outbreak. Kim Ji-yeon, Business Daily.
And in line with these efforts, the country also launched the Korea Grand Sale back in August to boost ailing domestic consumption. And now it's going to roll out another large-scale shopping festivals to step up the momentum. Our Lee Ju-young tells us more about it.
This is a typical Black Friday scene in the U.S., where excited shoppers fill the store to take advantage of the steep promotional sales being offered by retailers. Routinely known as the busiest shopping period of the year, retailers usually reap at least 20% of their annual profit from this event. Korea seeks to garner similar results, with the government set to host its own version of Black Friday through a super sales festival from October 1st, targeting both local and foreign consumers. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy believes that by promoting spending, the country can help make up for falling exports, which fell roughly 15% on year last month, and generate much-needed growth.
The economy is not doing well, so we've worked with businesses to stimulate spending through this event.
It added that the 2-week-long event would involve some 27,000 stores and markets across the country, making it the largest nationwide sales event to date. Luxury department stores, large discount chains, convenience stores, traditional markets, and even online shopping malls will take part, granting 50 to 70% price cuts to customers. Local credit card companies also plan to offer installment payment plans with no added interest to consumers to facilitate purchases. The government said it plans to gauge the effect of the sales event this time around and possibly make it an annual fixture, not only to spur domestic spending, but also help attract foreign tourists. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. So don't forget to tune in then. As always, thanks for watching and bye-bye for now.